In the heart of Detroit, the rhythm of life carried a beat, both vibrant and burdened by history. The city had long been a hub for dreams and industry, yet its streets bore the scars of decades of systemic inequality. For Eleanor Thompson, a 58-year-old retired teacher, the neighborhood where she had spent her entire life was a testament to resilience. Raised in the tumult of the civil rights movement, Eleanor was no stranger to the slow burn of change. Yet, as she observed her grandchildren navigating a world she thought had progressed, she realized the battle against racism was far from over. Every Saturday, Eleanor hosted a community prayer circle in her living room, a tradition passed down from her grandmother. It was a space where neighbors of all ages gathered, sharing stories of struggle and triumph. Among the regulars was her closest friend, Vernon Carter, a former auto worker whose sharp wit often masked the pain of being laid off after 30 years of loyal service. Vernon was still battling the echoes of discrimination he faced at his plant, now struggling to reinvent himself as a small business owner. Their group also included younger members, like Lisa, a 28-year-old social worker, and Marcus, a tech entrepreneur in his early 30s. Despite their age differences, the circle served as a bridge between generations. It was in this living room that Eleanor shared her dream of opening a resource center, a place that would combine financial literacy workshops with spiritual guidance. Her vision was met with enthusiasm, but also skepticism. "We've been here before," Vernon said one evening, leaning back in his chair. "You can pray all you want, but the system's not built for us," Eleanor responded with calm determination. "We've always had to build our own systems, Vernon. And we've always done it with faith." Little did they know, their dream of creating a sanctuary for empowerment would face challenges far beyond finances. The past had a way of resurfacing, bringing hidden prejudices and old wounds to the surface. But Eleanor's faith and her unwavering belief in community would prove to be the light guiding them through the storm. Eleanor's dream of a community resource center quickly became the talk of her neighborhood. The vision was clear: a space that combined practical tools like resume building workshops, small business seminars, and financial literacy classes with spiritual support through meditation, prayer, and counseling. To Eleanor, the Resource Center wasn't just a project, it was a legacy, one she hoped would uplift generations long after she was gone. Word spread quickly. The small prayer circle became a buzzing planning committee, with each member pitching in ideas. Marcus suggested hosting coding classes to help residents enter the tech industry. Lisa proposed a childcare program, knowing firsthand how many working parents struggled to juggle their responsibilities. Even Vernon, initially skeptical, began volunteering his time, offering to lead classes on budgeting and saving. But enthusiasm alone wouldn't fund the center. Eleanor and Marcus set up meetings with local churches, small businesses, and nonprofits, hoping to secure grants and donations. At first, the responses were promising. A nearby church agreed to host a fundraiser, and a local diner offered a portion of its monthly profits. It seemed as though everything was falling into place until it wasn't. One afternoon, Eleanor opened her mailbox to find a letter from the city zoning board. The resource center's location, a dilapidated building Eleanor had inherited from her late uncle, was zoned for residential use only. Changing the classification would require approval from the city council, a notoriously slow and bureaucratic process. "This is just another way to keep us in check," Vernon grumbled during a meeting at Eleanor's house. "They see us trying to rise, and they throw up roadblocks." Lisa tried to remain optimistic. "We'll push through this. We've got the community behind us, and that's what matters." But Eleanor sensed a deeper resistance. She had seen it before, subtle forms of racism that manifested as endless delays, increased scrutiny, and an ever-growing pile of paperwork. She feared the zoning issue was just the beginning. Determined not to be deterred, Eleanor reached out to local councilwoman Patricia Green, a longtime advocate for marginalized communities. Green agreed to meet with Eleanor and her group, but her warnings were sobering. "Changing zoning laws isn't impossible, but it's going to take time," Green said, "and you're going to face pushback, especially from residents who don't want to see certain types of projects in their neighborhoods." Eleanor's stomach churned at the euphemism. Certain types, she repeated. You mean projects that help black folks thrive? Green nodded. I'm afraid so. But if anyone can do this, it's you. Just be ready for a fight. The fight began sooner than expected. At the first city council meeting, Eleanor presented her case with poise and determination. She highlighted the resource center's potential to reduce poverty, improve education, and strengthen the community. But as she spoke, she noticed several council members exchanging glances, their expressions unreadable. When the floor opened for public comment, the room was eerily silent until a man in a neatly pressed suit stood up. I understand the intention behind this project, he began, but we have to consider the impact on property values. Projects like these often attract undesirable elements. Eleanor clenched her fists under the table, fighting the urge to respond. The man's words echoed a sentiment she had heard her entire life, that communities like hers were less deserving of investment, that their struggles were their own fault. After the meeting, Eleanor's group reconvened at her house. The atmosphere was tense, the energy drained. What now? Lisa asked, her voice tinged with frustration. They're clearly against us. Eleanor took a deep breath, her resolve hardening. We keep going. If they want to play dirty, we'll play smarter. Marcus, can you help us draft a petition? If we show them how much support we have, they'll have no choice but to listen. Over the next few weeks, the group hit the pavement, collecting signatures from neighbors, local businesses, and anyone willing to support their cause. They attended every city council meeting, countering objections with data and personal stories. Vernon, who had once been skeptical, became one of their fiercest advocates, delivering impassioned speeches that often drew applause. But as their efforts gained momentum, so did the opposition. Anonymous flyers appeared around the neighborhood, warning residents that the resource center would bring noise, traffic, and undesirable changes. Eleanor found one taped to her front door. That's how they operate, Vernon said when she showed him. Cowards hiding behind paper. Despite the setbacks, Eleanor's faith never wavered. She continued to host the prayer circle, encouraging the group to focus not just on their struggles, but on their victories. Every signature we get, every story we share, it's a step forward, she reminded them. And every step forward is a blessing. By the end of the month, they had collected over 1,000 signatures. The petition was enough to force the council to reconsider their decision. But the battle was far from over, and Eleanor knew the hardest challenges were still to come. The petition marked a turning point. News of Eleanor's fight for the resource center spread beyond the neighborhood, capturing the attention of local media. A small newspaper featured an article about her efforts, describing the center as a beacon of hope for a community often overlooked. It was a moment of validation, but Eleanor knew the fight was far from over. Public opinion was now split. Supporters saw the resource center as an opportunity to uplift the neighborhood, while detractors, many from more affluent parts of Detroit, voiced concerns about the project changing the character of the area. The phrase stung Eleanor every time she heard it. She couldn't help but wonder what kind of character they believed her community already had. Meanwhile, the group's efforts intensified. Marcus worked tirelessly to refine the business plan, emphasizing the economic benefits the center could bring. Lisa reached out to local schools and community leaders, gathering testimonials about the need for such a resource. Vernon, whose speeches had become the highlight of city council meetings, continued to rally support with his fiery rhetoric. But Eleanor sensed that their opponents weren't playing fair. During one particularly contentious meeting, a council member questioned her qualifications to run the center. "Do you have any experience managing a project of this scale?" he asked, his tone laced with condescension. Eleanor met his gaze, her voice steady. "I spent 30 years teaching in this city's public schools. I've mentored hundreds of students, many of whom are now successful professionals. If I can navigate the complexities of that system, I can manage this project." The room erupted in applause, but Eleanor knew she couldn't rely on words alone. She needed to secure tangible victories. A breakthrough came unexpected. One evening, Eleanor received a call from an old friend, Pastor James Walker, who led a prominent church in Detroit. The church had recently partnered with a national nonprofit focused on economic development in underserved communities. Pastor Walker offered to connect Eleanor with the organization's leadership, suggesting they might be willing to provide funding or legal assistance. "I believe in what you're doing, Eleanor," Pastor Walker said. "This center could be a game changer, not just for your neighborhood, but for the entire city." The partnership brought renewed energy to the project. The nonprofit offered pro bono legal support, helping the group navigate the zoning process. They also pledged a matching grant, challenging the community to raise $50,000, which the nonprofit would then double. The announcement galvanized the neighborhood. Fundraisers sprang up everywhere, from bake sales to block parties. Children sold lemonade on street corners, while local artists donated their work for an auction. The church hosted a gospel concert, with all proceeds going toward the center. Even Vernon, who had always been wary of asking for help, reached out to former colleagues, convincing several to contribute. But the opposition wasn't idle. At the next council meeting, a group of homeowners from a nearby affluent suburb voiced their concerns. "This project is admirable in theory," one woman said, "but we have to consider the unintended consequences. Increased traffic, noise, and potential safety issues could negatively impact the area." Eleanor stood up, her heart pounding. "Safety issues?" she said, her voice firm. "This center is about creating safety, economic safety, educational safety, spiritual safety. It's about giving people the tools they need to build better lives. If that's a threat to anyone, I suggest they take a hard look at why." The woman opened her mouth to respond, but before she could, Vernon rose from his seat. "I worked in this city for 30 years, he said, his voice trembling with emotion. "I built cars that carried this nation forward, but when the industry moved on, we were left behind. Now, someone finally has a vision to lift us up, and you want to block it because of traffic. Shame on you." His words hung in the air, silencing even the most vocal critics. In the weeks that followed, support for the center grew stronger. The community met the $50,000 goal, unlocking the matching grant. The nonprofit's legal team successfully challenged several of the zoning restrictions, forcing the council to schedule a final vote. Eleanor knew the stakes were high. If the council approved the zoning change, the center would become a reality. If they denied it, years of hard work could be undone. The night before the vote, Eleanor gathered her core team in her living room. They prayed together, each person voicing their hopes and fears. "Tomorrow's not just about us," Eleanor said when the prayers ended. "It's about everyone who came before us and everyone who'll come after. No matter what happens, we've already won, because we've proven what this community can do when we stand together." The following day, the council chambers were packed. Supporters and detractors filled every seat, the tension palpable. Eleanor sat in the front row, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. As the council members began to cast their votes, time seemed too slow. The council chamber was filled with murmurs as the final votes were cast. Eleanor held her breath, silently praying as the council chair announced the decision. "The motion to approve the zoning change has failed. The vote stands at 4-3 against." Gasps echoed through the room. Supporters turned to one another, their faces a mixture of disbelief and frustration. Eleanor felt a wave of emotions: anger, disappointment, and the weight of letting down her community. She clenched her jaw, refusing to let tears fall in front of their opponents. Outside the chambers, her group gathered, stunned by the defeat. "What now?" Lisa asked, her voice trembling. "We did everything right. We got the signatures, the funding, everything they asked for. We knew they'd fight dirty," Vernon said, his expression dark. "They don't care about the rules. They just don't want us to succeed." Eleanor stayed silent, staring at the council building, as if willing it to crumble under the weight of its own hypocrisy. She thought of all the promises they'd made to the community, the children who had sold lemonade, the elders who had donated their savings. Could she really go back to them and say they had failed? As the group dispersed, Marcus pulled Eleanor aside. "I've been digging into the council's records," he said in a hushed tone. "One of the members who voted against us, Councilman Harris, has ties to a real estate firm. They've been quietly buying up properties near the proposed site. If the center doesn't go through, they stand to profit. Eleanor's eyes widened. You're saying this wasn't about zoning at all? It was about money? Looks that way, Marcus replied. I've got documents to back it up, but we'll need more to make this public. Eleanor's initial anger was replaced by determination. If the council's decision wasn't based on merit, they had a chance to fight back. But exposing corruption was risky. It could turn allies into enemies and invite scrutiny on a scale she wasn't sure she was ready for. That night, Eleanor called an emergency meeting at her house. The core team gathered around her dining table, the atmosphere tense. Marcus presented his findings: emails, financial reports, and property records linking Councilman Harris to the real estate firm. This could be the leverage we need, Marcus said. If we go public with this, they'll have no choice but to reconsider. But Vernon shook his head. You think they'll just roll over? People like Harris have been playing this game for years. They'll bury us before we can even get the story out. Lisa leaned forward, her brow furrowed. What other choice do we have? If we don't fight back, they'll win, and the community will lose everything. Eleanor listened to the debate, her mind racing. She knew they were standing at a crossroads. Taking on the council meant risking their reputations, their safety, and possibly their funding. But walking away felt like a betrayal of everything they had worked for. Finally, she raised her hand, quieting the room. If we do this, we do it with integrity, she said. We'll gather more evidence, enough to prove beyond a doubt that this was about greed, not zoning, and we'll go to the press together. No secrets, no backroom deals. The group agreed, though the tension was palpable. Over the next several weeks, they worked tirelessly to build their case. Marcus combed through public records, uncovering more connections between Harris and the real estate firm. Lisa interviewed residents who had been pressured to sell their homes, documenting their stories. Even Vernon used his old connections to gather information, surprising everyone with his knack for investigative work. As the evidence piled up, Eleanor reached out to a trusted journalist at the Detroit Free Press. The reporter, Sarah Mitchell, was known for her hard-hitting exposés on corruption and systemic inequality. After reviewing their findings, Sarah agreed to write the story, promising to protect the group's anonymity until the article was published. The day the story broke, it sent shockwaves through the city. The headline read, "Conflict of Interest? Councilman tied to real estate firm blocking community center." The article detailed the connections between Harris and the firm, supported by quotes from residents and documents provided by Eleanor's team. Public reaction was swift and furious. Calls flooded the council office, demanding accountability. Local activists organized protests outside City Hall, chanting slogans like "Justice for the community" and "Greed has no place here." But the fight wasn't over. Councilman Harris denied the allegations, calling them baseless and accusing Eleanor's group of trying to manipulate the system. The council announced an internal review, but Eleanor knew that wasn't enough. "We can't let them sweep this under the rug," she told her team during another meeting. "We need to keep the pressure on. Every day they delay is another day our community suffers." The group decided to hold a town hall meeting, inviting residents, activists, and media to discuss the resource center and the corruption allegations. The event was packed, with people spilling out into the street. Eleanor took the stage, her voice ringing with conviction. "This isn't just about one project," she said. "It's about standing up to a system that has ignored us for too long. We deserve better. Our children deserve better. And we won't stop until we get it." The crowd erupted in applause, their energy electrified. For the first time since the council's vote, Eleanor felt a flicker of hope. The town hall's resounding success marked a pivotal moment in the fight for the resource center. Eleanor's impassioned speech, combined with the damning evidence against Councilman Harris, galvanized the community. Local news outlets picked up the story, and even regional stations began covering the controversy. Eleanor's name became synonymous with resilience and determination, but with visibility came new challenges. The backlash was swift. Harris's supporters launched a smear campaign, painting Eleanor as an agitator trying to destabilize the neighborhood. Flyers accusing her of ulterior motives appeared on doorsteps, and online forums buzzed with unfounded rumors about her finances and personal life. At first, Eleanor tried to ignore the attacks, but they began to take a toll. One morning, she found graffiti scrawled across the door of her uncle's old building. "Stay in your place." Eleanor stared at the words, a cold knot forming in her stomach. Vernon, who had been helping her clean out the building that day, put a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "They're scared," he said. "Scared because they know you're winning. Winning shouldn't feel like this," Eleanor replied, her voice heavy with exhaustion. Vernon handed her a rag. "Then let's show them what strength looks like, together." They scrubbed the hateful message away. But as the graffiti faded, Eleanor resolved not to let fear silence her. The community's response to the smear campaign was overwhelming. Neighbors organized patrols to protect the building, ensuring no further acts of vandalism occurred. Local artists painted a mural on the wall, depicting hands of different colors lifting a glowing torch, an image of unity and defiance. Eleanor's group leaned into the momentum. They held rallies, inviting prominent activists and clergy members to speak. Pastor James Walker became a vocal supporter, using his platform to draw attention to the broader issues of systemic racism and economic inequality. "The fight for this center is about more than one building," he declared at a rally. "It's about proving that no matter how many obstacles they throw at us, we will rise." Marcus and Lisa ramped up their efforts, meeting with more nonprofits and local businesses to secure additional funding. One organization, inspired by Eleanor's determination, pledged to cover the center's operating costs for its first 2 years. Even Vernon, who had once been skeptical, became a driving force. He began hosting financial workshops at the church, giving residents a taste of what the resource center could offer. His no-nonsense approach, peppered with humor and hard truths, made him a local favorite. "Don't tell me you can't save," he'd say, wagging a finger at the crowd. "If you've got a smartphone in your pocket, you can put $5 in a savings account." The workshops were a hit, drawing people from neighboring communities. They reinforced the center's value, making it harder for detractors to argue against its potential impact. Meanwhile, the city council faced mounting scrutiny. The internal review into Harris's conduct revealed discrepancies in his financial disclosures, raising questions about conflicts of interest. Public pressure forced the council to suspend Harris pending further investigation. But the suspension wasn't enough for Eleanor's group. "This isn't just about Harris," Marcus argued during a strategy meeting. "The whole system enabled him. We need to demand structural changes," Eleanor agreed. "If we can push for policy reforms, we'll make it harder for anyone else to block projects like this in the future." They drafted a list of demands, including increased transparency in council decisions and stricter oversight of zoning processes. The demands were published in an open letter, which quickly gained traction. Activists across the city rallied behind the cause, framing it as a fight for equity and accountability. As the fight escalated, Eleanor found herself grappling with personal challenges. The long hours and constant stress began to take a toll on her health. One evening, after returning home from a rally, she collapsed onto the couch, her chest tight and her breathing shallow. Lisa, who had been dropping off paperwork, rushed to her side. "You need to rest, Eleanor," she said, her voice tinged with worry. "You can't pour from an empty cup." "I can't stop now," Eleanor replied, though her voice was weak. "The community is counting on me. They're counting on all of us," Lisa countered gently. "You're not in this alone." Lisa's words stayed with Eleanor. She realized she had been carrying the weight of the fight on her shoulders, forgetting that it was a collective effort. At the next meeting, she delegated more responsibilities, trusting her team to share the load. The decision was liberating. By allowing others to step up, Eleanor saw the movement grow even stronger. It wasn't just her fight anymore, it was the community's. The turning point came when the council announced a special session to reconsider the zoning decision. The announcement was a direct result of the public outcry, proof that the community's efforts were making an impact. In the days leading up to the session, Eleanor's group worked tirelessly to prepare. They gathered more signatures, rehearsed speeches, and organized a rally outside City Hall to coincide with the vote. On the day of the session, the streets outside the council building were filled with supporters holding signs and chanting slogans. Eleanor stood at the center of the crowd, her heart swelling with pride and gratitude. "We've come so far," she said, addressing the crowd. "No matter what happens today, know that this fight has already made us stronger. And no matter the outcome, we will keep pushing forward." The crowd erupted in cheers, their energy fueling Eleanor as she walked into the council chambers. The council chambers buzzed with anticipation as Eleanor took her seat. The special session had drawn an even larger crowd than the previous meetings, with community members, activists, and journalists packing the room. Outside, the chants of supporters echoed through the streets. Eleanor took a deep breath, steadying herself. This was their chance, but she knew the fight was far from over. The session began with Councilman Harris's empty seat drawing quiet murmurs from the audience. His suspension had been a victory, but Eleanor understood that removing one corrupt official wouldn't dismantle the web of resistance they faced. As the council reviewed the motion to reconsider the zoning decision, Eleanor and her team waited nervously. Their presentation was first on the agenda. Marcus delivered a sharp, data-driven argument, citing statistics on economic growth and social impact. Lisa followed, sharing heartfelt stories from residents whose lives had already been changed by the financial workshops and other initiatives the group had started. Finally, Eleanor stood, her voice steady but resolute. "We're not just asking for a building," she said, addressing the council. "We're asking for the chance to prove what this community is capable of when given the tools to succeed. Denying us isn't just about zoning, it's about denying hope to people who've been told for too long that they don't matter." The crowd erupted in applause, but Eleanor noticed some council members shifting uncomfortably in their seats. She knew the battle would come down to more than words. It would depend on their ability to counter the quiet but persistent opposition working behind the scenes. As the session continued, the council invited residents to voice their opinions. While many spoke passionately in favor of the resource center, a few vocal detractors presented a stark contrast. One woman, representing a neighborhood association from a nearby affluent area, claimed the center would disrupt the peace and bring undesirable elements to the community. Another man, a local landlord, argued that the project would devalue property and attract crime. Eleanor felt her blood boil as she listened to the coded language. The underlying racism and classism were barely concealed, but she knew losing her temper would only play into their hands. Instead, she jotted down notes, preparing to address each point with calm, reasoned responses. But the real bombshell came near the end of the session, when a council member revealed a letter from a prominent developer. The developer claimed interest in purchasing the same building Eleanor's group planned to use, proposing a mixed-use commercial and residential complex that promised jobs and tax revenue. Eleanor's stomach dropped. The timing was no coincidence. This was a calculated move to pit the promise of economic growth against the resource center's community-focused mission. After the session, the group gathered at Marcus's office, a small co-working space he had rented to grow his tech startup. The mood was tense. "This developer angle is going to be a problem," Marcus said, pacing the room. "Jobs and tax revenue. That's going to sway a lot of people." Lisa crossed her arms, visibly frustrated. "They're dangling promises they have no intention of keeping. We've seen it before. Those projects never benefit the people who actually live here." Vernon leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. "Then we need to remind folks of that. Show them what happens when developers come in and push out the very people they're supposed to help." Eleanor nodded. "We'll need data, testimonials, anything that proves this isn't just about growth, it's about displacement." Lisa suggested reaching out to other communities that had faced similar battles, hoping to gather evidence of the long-term impact of such developments. Marcus offered to dig into the developers' past projects, looking for inconsistencies or broken promises. As the group strategized, an unexpected email landed in Eleanor's inbox. It was from Maria Alvarez, a community organizer in Chicago who had led a successful fight against a similar development project. Maria offered to share her experience and provide guidance. "I've seen this playbook before," Maria wrote. "They promise jobs and investment, but the reality is displacement and gentrification. If you're willing to fight, I'm here to help." Eleanor wasted no time setting up a call. Maria's insights were invaluable. She explained how her team had mobilized residents, documented the developers' broken promises, and leveraged media coverage to sway public opinion. "You have to frame this as a choice," Maria advised. "A choice between real, lasting community investment and empty promises designed to benefit outsiders." Inspired by Maria's guidance, Eleanor's team launched a new campaign. They created flyers and social media posts highlighting the risks of displacement and the success stories from their financial workshops. They also organized a community forum, inviting residents to share their fears and hopes for the neighborhood's future. As the fight intensified, so did the strain on Eleanor's relationships. Her daughter, Jasmine, who had been supportive but distant, began expressing concern. "Mom, you're pouring everything into this," Jasmine said during a rare family dinner. "What happens if it doesn't work out?" Eleanor sighed, setting down her fork. "If we don't try, we'll never know what we could have accomplished." "This isn't just about me, Jasmine. It's about all of us." Jasmine looked unconvinced. "But at what cost? Your health? Your time with your family?" "We miss you, Mom." The words hit Eleanor harder than she expected. She realized she had been so focused on the fight that she hadn't considered how it was affecting her loved ones. But before she could respond, her phone buzzed with a notification, a news alert about the developer's plans. Eleanor glanced at the message, her resolve hardening. "I hear you, Jasmine," she said softly, "but this isn't something I can walk away from." Not now. The next city council meeting loomed large, with the decision now framed as a battle between two visions for the neighborhood. The stakes had never been higher. Eleanor knew they had the community's support, but the developer's influence was a formidable opponent. As the group prepared for the next round, they couldn't shake the feeling that another twist was just around the corner. The days leading up to the next city council meeting were fraught with tension. Eleanor's team worked tirelessly, gathering more evidence and amplifying their message through community outreach and local media. Yet, the pressure weighed heavily on everyone, revealing cracks not only in their strategy, but also in their relationships. Eleanor sat in her living room one evening, staring at a stack of testimonials from residents. Each story was a testament to the resource center's necessity, yet the weight of responsibility pressed down on her. Jasmine's words lingered in her mind. At what cost? She was jolted from her thoughts by a knock at the door. It was Vernon, carrying a box of flyers. His face, usually animated with humor, was somber. "Mind if I come in?" he asked. Eleanor nodded, gesturing to the couch. "You look like you've seen a ghost." Vernon set the box down and sighed. "I ran into one of Harris's old buddies at the hardware store. Word is, the developer's throwing around big money to make sure this project doesn't happen. Bribes, Eleanor." They're greasing palms left and right. Eleanor's stomach churned. "How do we fight that?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Vernon leaned forward, his expression uncharacteristically serious. "We fight with the truth, like we've been doing. But you need to know, this isn't just politics anymore. These people play dirty. You're putting yourself and everyone around you at risk." Eleanor nodded slowly, her resolve unshaken, but her anxiety growing. "We can't stop now, Vernon. If we give up, they win." Vernon smiled faintly. "I figured you'd say that. Just promise me you'll be careful." The pressure also began to strain Marcus and Lisa's once unshakable camaraderie. During a strategy meeting, the two clashed over how to handle the developer's growing influence. "We need to go harder," Marcus argued, pacing the room. "Expose them for the frauds they are. Dig into their past projects. Get the media to run with it." Lisa shook her head. "We've already got the facts on our side. If we escalate, we risk looking desperate or unprofessional. We need to stay focused on what we're building, not just tearing them down." "Focused?" "Lisa, they're out there buying votes. And you want to play nice?" "Marcus, this isn't about playing nice. It's about staying credible. If we lose that, we lose everything." Eleanor stepped in, raising her hands to quiet them. Enough. We need both strategies. Marcus, keep digging, but do it carefully. Lisa, double down on the positive messaging. We're not going to win by fighting each other. The tension in the room was palpable, but both nodded, albeit reluctantly. Eleanor knew their frustration wasn't personal. It was the weight of the fight, the stakes that seemed to grow higher every day. Later that week, Eleanor's daughter Jasmine showed up unexpectedly at one of the group's meetings. She lingered in the doorway, watching as her mother directed the discussion. When the meeting ended, she pulled Eleanor aside. "Mom, we need to talk," Jasmine said, her tone firm. Eleanor gestured for her to sit, but Jasmine shook her head. "No, I won't take long. I can't keep watching you do this to yourself. Jasmine, I've told you." "Don't," Jasmine interrupted. "Don't tell me it's for the greater good. I see how tired you are, how stressed. And I get it, Mom, I do. But you've already done so much. Why does it always have to be you?" Eleanor looked at her daughter, guilt and love warring in her chest. "Because if not me, then who? This isn't just about me, Jasmine. It's about leaving something behind that matters." Jasmine shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. "What about leaving yourself behind for your family? For me? I'm not asking you to stop caring, but you need to find a balance. You don't have to carry everything alone." The words hit Eleanor like a freight train. She realized Jasmine wasn't just frustrated, she was afraid of losing her. "You're right," Eleanor said softly. "I've been so focused on the fight, I haven't been thinking about how it's affecting you or me. I'll try to do better. I promise." The next morning, Eleanor received an unexpected phone call. The voice on the other end introduced himself as Harold Bennett, a retired lawyer who had lived in the neighborhood for decades. "I've been following your fight," Harold said, "and I think you're doing something remarkable. I'd like to help." Eleanor was skeptical. "What kind of help?" "I spent 40 years practicing law, much of it fighting cases like yours. If you'll have me, I'd like to volunteer my time to advise your group." "No charge." Eleanor was stunned. She had never met Harold, but his reputation as a skilled and principled attorney was well known. "Why now?" she asked. "I've been on the sidelines too long," Harold admitted. "It's time I did something that matters." Harold quickly became an invaluable asset. He helped the team refine their arguments for the upcoming council meeting, ensuring their presentation was airtight. He also drafted a legal memo challenging the developer's proposal, citing potential violations of zoning regulations. One evening, after a particularly long day of planning, Eleanor sat alone in her living room. She gazed at the mural painted on the Resource Center's building, its vibrant colors glowing in the streetlight. She thought of all the people who had joined the fight: Vernon, Lisa, Marcus, Jasmine, Harold. Each had brought their own struggles and sacrifices to the table, and together they had created something bigger than themselves. Eleanor closed her eyes and whispered a prayer, not for victory, but for strength. Strength to see the fight through, whatever the outcome. The council meeting loomed large on the horizon, but Eleanor's team wasn't ready to rest. Harold Bennett's arrival had been a turning point, sharpening their strategy and bolstering their confidence. Yet, as the fight dragged on, their opponents grew more aggressive, and the stakes felt higher than ever. One afternoon, as Eleanor and Marcus reviewed their materials in the Resource Center building, Lisa burst through the door, her face flushed with urgency. "You're not going to believe this," she said, holding up her phone. "What is it?" Eleanor asked, setting aside her notes. "An anonymous source just leaked documents about the developer. They've been fined multiple times for violating labor laws and cutting corners on safety regulations. And get this, they were sued last year for displacing tenants from a low-income housing project in Cleveland." Marcus leaned over Lisa's shoulder, scanning the documents on her phone. "This is gold," he said. "If we can verify this, it'll crush their credibility." Eleanor frowned. "Anonymous sources can be risky. We need to tread carefully. If this backfires, it could hurt us more than it helps." Lisa nodded. "I'll contact some reporters I trust and see if they can verify it. If this checks out, it'll be all over the news by tomorrow. While the leaked documents seemed like a gift, a new obstacle soon threatened to derail their progress. Just days before the council meeting, the nonprofit funding a significant portion of the center's budget pulled out without warning. Eleanor received the devastating news during a late-night phone call. "We're sorry," the representative said, their voice tinged with regret. "We've been receiving pressure from certain parties. We can't afford the backlash." Eleanor gripped the phone tightly, her heart sinking. "So that's it. After everything we've done, I wish it were different," the representative said. "But our hands are tied." When Eleanor shared the news with her team, the reactions were a mix of disbelief and anger. "They caved," Marcus said, pacing the room. "Just like everyone else who's afraid to stand up to these people." Lisa slumped in her chair, shaking her head. "Without their funding, how are we supposed to keep going? Even if we win the vote, how do we sustain the center?" Harold, sitting quietly in the corner, finally spoke. "Setbacks like this are part of the game. They want you to feel defeated. The question is, how do you respond?" Eleanor straightened her back, determination flickering in her eyes. "We pivot. We've lost their support, but we still have the community. If we can show the council that we're not giving up, maybe we can find other ways to fund the center." The night before the council meeting, the team organized a rally in the neighborhood. Hundreds of residents showed up, holding signs and chanting slogans of solidarity. The energy was palpable, but Eleanor couldn't shake the weight of the recent setbacks. As she stood to address the crowd, her gaze swept over the faces before her, parents holding children, elders who had lived through decades of struggle, young people brimming with hope. "This fight isn't just about a building," she began, her voice steady despite the lump in her throat. "It's about proving that we belong, that our voices matter, that our dreams are just as valid as anyone else's. They want us to give up. They want us to believe we can't win. But look around you. Look at the strength in this community. That's something no one can take away." The crowd erupted into cheers, their chants growing louder. For the first time in days, Eleanor felt the tide turning. As the rally wound down, a young woman approached Eleanor. She introduced herself as Andrea, a local college student who had been following the fight closely. "I've been doing some research on the developer," Andrea said, handing Eleanor a flash drive. "I found some things that might help." "What kind of things?" Eleanor asked, curious. Andrea hesitated. "Emails. Internal memos. They're using shell companies to hide how much land they've already acquired in this area. It looks like they've been planning to gentrify the neighborhood for years." Eleanor's breath caught. "How did you get this?" Andrea shrugged. "I interned for them last summer. I didn't know what they were doing back then, but when I found out, I started saving everything I could." Eleanor thanked her, promising to review the information carefully. As Andrea walked away, Eleanor felt a surge of hope. This could be the smoking gun they needed. The team worked late into the night, analyzing the new information. Harold confirmed that the memos and emails were legitimate, and Marcus created a detailed presentation connecting the dots. "This is it," Marcus said, his eyes gleaming with excitement. "This proves they've been lying to everyone about their intentions, their plans, everything." Lisa nodded, though her expression remained cautious. "It's great, but it also raises the stakes. If we go public with this, they'll come at us harder than ever." Eleanor looked around the room at her team, the people who had stood by her through every challenge. "They've already thrown everything they have at us," she said, "and we're still standing. Tomorrow, we give it everything we've got." The day of the council meeting arrived with a cold, gray sky. Eleanor stood in front of her mirror, smoothing the creases in her dress. She thought of her grandmother, who had marched for civil rights, and her mother, who had worked tirelessly to provide for their family. "This is for you," she whispered, closing her eyes. "For all of us." When she arrived at City Hall, the air outside was electric. Supporters lined the steps, chanting and waving signs. Opponents stood in smaller clusters, their expressions tense and guarded. Eleanor took a deep breath and walked inside, ready to face whatever came next. Inside the packed council chamber, the tension was palpable. Supporters of the Resource Center filled one side of the room, while detractors and advocates for the developer occupied the other. Eleanor's team sat in the front row, their nerves barely concealed. This meeting was different. Years of systemic struggles and recent weeks of relentless campaigning had led to this moment. Eleanor took a deep breath as she prepared to speak. Her thoughts swirled with the stories of her neighbors, the data her team had compiled, and the damning evidence Andrea had provided. If this didn't sway the council, she wasn't sure what would. As the session began, Eleanor scanned the room, her eyes landing on a face she hadn't expected to see: Jasmine. Her daughter sat near the back, her arms crossed, but her expression softer than usual. Eleanor felt a surge of emotion. Jasmine had stayed away from most of the fight, frustrated by her mother's relentless commitment, yet here she was. When the council invited Eleanor to present, she glanced at Jasmine one last time, drawing strength from the fact that her daughter was witnessing this pivotal moment. Eleanor stood tall as she walked to the podium. "Good evening, council members. Thank you for giving us the opportunity to speak again on behalf of the proposed Community Resource Center." Her presentation was concise but powerful, weaving together personal stories, economic data, and the broader historical context of systemic inequality in Detroit. She highlighted how the center would address critical gaps in education and financial literacy while preserving the cultural fabric of the neighborhood. When she revealed the newly uncovered documents, emails, and memos proving the developer's long-term plans to gentrify the area, the room erupted. "Order, order," the council chair demanded, banging the gavel. Eleanor pressed on, her voice unwavering. These plans weren't made with this community in mind. They were made for outsiders, for profit, and at the expense of the people who have lived here, worked here, and built their lives here for generations. The council members exchanged uneasy glances. Eleanor could see cracks forming in their previously united front. During the public comment period, residents took turns voicing their opinions. Many spoke in favor of the resource center, sharing stories of how it had already begun to impact their lives through financial workshops and community gatherings. Then, a surprising voice joined the chorus. Harold Bennett stepped up to the podium, a calm but commanding presence. "For those who don't know me, I'm Harold Bennett," he began. "I've lived in this city for over 60 years. I've seen the good, the bad, and the ugly of how decisions like this shape our communities. And let me tell you, what this group is proposing isn't just a building. It's a lifeline." He paused, scanning the room. "I also know the developer's playbook because I've seen it before. Promises of jobs and investment that never materialize, displacement masked as progress, and profits funneled out of our neighborhoods. Don't let history repeat itself." His words carried the weight of experience, silencing even the most vocal opponents. During a break in the session, Eleanor stepped outside to get some air. She found Jasmine waiting for her on the steps of City Hall. "You were amazing in there," Jasmine said softly. Eleanor smiled, her shoulders relaxing for the first time all day. "I didn't expect to see you here." Jasmine shrugged. "I couldn't stay away. You're fighting for something bigger than I realized." "I'm proud of you, Mom." Tears welled in Eleanor's eyes. "I just want to make things better for all of us. But especially for you and the kids." Jasmine hugged her, a rare moment of connection that reminded Eleanor why she had started this fight in the first place. When the meeting resumed, the developers' representatives took the floor. Their presentation was slick and polished, complete with renderings of the proposed mixed-use complex. They emphasized economic growth, job creation, and tax revenue, strategically glossing over concerns about displacement. One representative, a sharply dressed woman with a practiced smile, addressed the leaked documents. "These accusations are baseless," she said. "Our company has a proven track record of community investment, and we intend to uphold those values here in Detroit." The developers' arguments swayed some in the audience, but Eleanor noticed the council members seemed less convinced. The weight of the leaked evidence was hard to dismiss. As the meeting drew to a close, the council chair allowed Eleanor to make a final statement. She stood at the podium, her hands steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. "I want to leave you with one thought," she said. "This isn't just about dollars and cents. It's about people, real people, whose lives will be forever changed by your decision. You have the power to uplift a community that has been overlooked for too long. Please don't let us down." Her words hung in the air, resonating with supporters and skeptics alike. After hours of deliberation, the council announced that they would vote the following week. Eleanor and her team left the chamber exhausted, but hopeful. The evidence was compelling, the community was mobilized, and the opposition's veneer of credibility had been cracked. That night, as Eleanor walked home, she felt a rare moment of peace. Whatever the outcome, she knew they had fought with everything they had. The week leading up to the council's final vote was fraught with tension. The air in the neighborhood buzzed with anticipation, hope, and a lingering fear of disappointment. Eleanor and her team worked tirelessly, preparing for last-minute challenges while trying to manage the emotional toll of the fight. As momentum built in favor of the resource center, the opposition intensified its efforts. Anonymous letters accusing Eleanor of financial mismanagement appeared in the mailboxes of council members, neighbors, and even local media outlets. The claims were baseless, but they caused a stir. Eleanor received a late-night call from Harold. "I've seen this kind of smear campaign before," he said grimly. "They're trying to discredit you before the vote. You need to be ready to counter this." "Counter it how?" Eleanor asked, frustration creeping into her voice. "Do I stand on the corner with a megaphone shouting that I've done nothing wrong?" "No," Harold replied firmly. "You stay calm, stick to the facts, and let your actions speak for themselves. They're counting on you to lose your composure. Don't give them the satisfaction." The next day, Eleanor called a press conference in front of the Resource Center building. Flanked by Marcus, Lisa, and Vernon, she addressed the accusations head-on. "These claims are not just false, they're desperate," she said, her voice steady. "They're an attempt to distract from the real issue, whether this council will stand with the community or with special interests. My team and I remain committed to transparency and accountability, and we invite anyone with questions to speak with us directly." Her poise and confidence struck a chord with the media, turning the smear campaign into an opportunity to showcase her integrity. Despite the public show of strength, Eleanor couldn't shake her unease. That evening, as she prepared for another community meeting, she found herself staring at her grandmother's old Bible on the coffee table. She hadn't opened it in weeks, too consumed by the fight to take a moment for herself. Eleanor sat down, flipping through the well-worn pages until she landed on a passage her grandmother often recited. "Let us not grow weary of doing good, for in due season we will reap, if we do not give up." The words brought a wave of emotion. Eleanor closed her eyes, whispering a quiet prayer for strength, wisdom, and the courage to face whatever came next. The night before the vote, Marcus received a tip from an unexpected source, a junior employee at the developer's firm. They wanted to remain anonymous, but had information that could change everything. "They've been manipulating cost estimates for the proposed complex," the tipster revealed. "The jobs and tax revenue they're promising, it's smoke and mirrors. The numbers don't add up." Marcus worked through the night, analyzing the documents provided. By morning, he had compiled a damning report exposing the developer's false claims. He presented his findings to the team. "This is it," Marcus said, his exhaustion evident, but his excitement palpable. "If we bring this to the council tomorrow, it could tip the scales." Lisa frowned, her tone cautious. "It's powerful, but is it enough? We're running out of time to sway undecided votes." Eleanor studied the report, her mind racing. "It's more than enough," she said finally. "But we need to make it clear how this directly impacts the people in our community. Numbers alone won't move hearts." Meanwhile, the neighborhood rallied in one final show of solidarity. Residents decorated their windows with posters reading, "We believe in the Resource Center," and hosted a candlelight vigil outside City Hall. Eleanor attended, feeling a renewed sense of purpose as she saw the faces of children, elders, and families holding candles in the cold November air. One young boy approached Eleanor, clutching a handmade sign that read, "The Resource Center can change my life." His mother stood behind him, tears in her eyes. "Thank you for fighting for us," she said softly. Eleanor knelt to speak to the boy. "You're the reason we're doing this," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Never stop believing in what you can achieve. The day of the vote arrived, and the council chambers were packed to capacity. Eleanor and her team sat in the front row, their evidence and arguments meticulously prepared. As the meeting began, the developers' representatives presented their final pitch. They dismissed the leaked documents as misleading and reiterated their claims of economic benefits, though their confidence seemed shaken. When it was Eleanor's turn, she delivered a presentation that was equal parts data and humanity. She highlighted Marcus's findings, showing how the developers' promises were built on falsehoods. She shared testimonials from residents, painting a vivid picture of what the resource center could achieve. Finally, she addressed the council directly. This vote isn't just about a building. It's about choosing who this city is for the people who live here, or those who see it as an opportunity to profit at our expense. I urge you to choose hope, integrity, and community. After hours of deliberation, the council prepared to cast their votes. Eleanor sat in silence, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She felt the weight of the room pressing down on her, every second stretching into an eternity. As the council chair called for the final tally, Eleanor closed her eyes and whispered a silent prayer. The motion to approve the rezoning for the Community Resource Center passes 5-2. Cheers erupted from the audience. Eleanor felt a rush of relief and disbelief as her team embraced her, tears streaming down their faces. The battle was won, but Eleanor knew the fight for the center's success was just beginning. The council's decision to approve the rezoning felt like a monumental victory, but Eleanor knew the battle wasn't truly over. With the zoning issue resolved, the developer shifted its focus to stalling tactics, legal challenges, and attempts to sow doubt about the feasibility of the resource center. The victory had galvanized the community, but it had also emboldened their opponents to fight harder, even in defeat. 2 days after the council's vote, Eleanor received a certified letter from the developer's legal team. It was a formal notice of intent to sue, claiming that her team's presentation to the council contained misleading and defamatory statements. Eleanor read the letter twice, her hands trembling. She called Harold immediately. "They're just trying to scare you," Harold said after reviewing the document. "The claims are weak, and they know it, but it's a tactic to drain your resources and distract you from moving forward," Eleanor sighed. "We barely have enough to start the center. If this drags out, it could ruin everything." "Let me handle this," Harold said firmly. "Focus on the work that matters. They want you to doubt yourself, but you've already won the most important fight." As Harold worked to counter the lawsuit, Marcus received another unexpected tip. A former employee of the developer reached out anonymously, offering inside information that could dismantle the company's case. "They're bluffing," the source revealed during a phone call. "Their real goal is to delay the project until the funding dries up. They don't want to win the case, they just want you to give up." Marcus shared the revelation with the team during a late-night meeting at Eleanor's house. "Their betting will fold under pressure," Marcus explained, pacing the room. "But we have everything we need to fight back. If we expose this strategy, it'll destroy their credibility." Lisa nodded, but looked worried. "We need to be careful. If we go public with this and it backfires, it could hurt the center's reputation." Eleanor listened intently, weighing their options. Finally, she spoke. "We've come too far to back down now. Marcus, reach out to the press. If we're going to fight this, we're doing it out in the open." The decision to go public wasn't without controversy. Some community members worried that escalating the conflict would invite more attacks, while others saw it as a necessary step to protect the project. One evening, Eleanor attended a neighborhood meeting to address the concerns directly. The room was filled with familiar faces, neighbors, activists, and local leaders who had supported the resource center from the beginning. "I know some of you are worried about what this fight will bring," Eleanor said, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "And I don't blame you. But if we give up now, we send a message that our community can be intimidated, that our dreams can be delayed indefinitely. I won't accept that, and I hope you won't either." Her words resonated with many, but not all. After the meeting, a longtime supporter approached her. "Eleanor, you've done more for this community than anyone else," he said. "But sometimes I wonder if you're risking too much. You've got to think about what happens if we lose," Eleanor met his gaze, her determination unwavering. "I have thought about it," she replied, "and I'd rather risk everything fighting for what's right than live with the regret of not trying." As tensions reached their peak, Eleanor received an unexpected visitor at her home. Andrea, the college student who had previously provided critical evidence against the developer, arrived with new information. "I've been digging deeper," Andrea said, handing Eleanor a folder. "This is everything I could find about their financial backers. Turns out, some of them have ties to city contracts. If this goes public, it could be a huge scandal." Eleanor's eyes widened as she skimmed the documents. "Andrea, this is incredible. But are you sure about sharing this? It could put you in a tough position." Andrea nodded. "I've thought about that. But this fight isn't just yours, it's all of ours. If this helps, it's worth it." With Andrea's new evidence and Harold's legal expertise, the team organized a press conference to expose the developer's tactics. The event was held on the steps of City Hall, drawing a large crowd of supporters and media. Eleanor stood at the podium, flanked by Marcus, Lisa, Vernon, and Andrea. She spoke with conviction, detailing the developer's history of unethical practices and their attempts to intimidate her team. "This isn't just about one project," Eleanor said, her voice ringing with determination. "It's about standing up to those who think they can silence us, delay us, and divide us. This community has shown time and again that we are stronger together, and we will not be deterred." The press conference was a turning point. The developers' attempts to discredit the resource center began to backfire, with local media shifting focus to the company's questionable practices. With the lawsuit losing traction and public support for the center at an all-time high, Eleanor and her team turned their attention to the next steps. They finalized plans for the center's launch, organizing a groundbreaking ceremony to celebrate the progress they had made. Jasmine, who had become increasingly involved in the fight, volunteered to help coordinate the event. "You've inspired a lot of people, Mom," she said one evening as they worked side by side. "Including me," Eleanor smiled, feeling a deep sense of fulfillment. The journey had tested her in ways she never imagined, but it had also brought her closer to her daughter and her community. On the night before the groundbreaking ceremony, Eleanor stood outside the Resource Center building, gazing at the mural that had become a symbol of their struggle. The vibrant colors seemed to glow under the streetlights, a testament to the resilience of the people who had fought for this moment. She whispered a quiet prayer of gratitude, knowing that the fight wasn't over, but feeling more prepared than ever to face whatever came next. The morning of the groundbreaking ceremony was crisp and clear, with sunlight streaming over the streets of the neighborhood. A small stage had been set up in front of the Resource Center building, adorned with banners that read, "A new beginning for our community." Eleanor arrived early, dressed in a deep blue suit that her mother had given her years ago. She stood silently for a moment, taking in the scene as volunteers bustled around, setting up chairs and arranging refreshments. It was a day of celebration, but the tension lingered like an invisible shadow. The developers' representatives had promised one final legal maneuver to block the center's construction, and Eleanor's team braced themselves for the possibility of another fight. By mid-morning, the crowd began to swell. Neighbors, activists, local leaders, and even curious passersby filled the street. Jasmine and her children stood near the front, waving at Eleanor as she moved through the crowd, shaking hands and exchanging warm smiles. Harold arrived next, carrying a thick folder. "I spoke to the judge handling their last-minute injunction," he said quietly. "It doesn't look good for them. The evidence we presented undermines their entire case." Eleanor exhaled slowly. "Let's hope that's the end of it." Lisa and Marcus joined them, their expressions a mix of excitement and nerves. "We've got reporters from all the major outlets here," Lisa said, glancing at her phone. "This could put the Resource Center on the map in a big way." Vernon chuckled, clapping Marcus on the back. "Hope you're ready to be famous, kid. They'll be writing about this for years." As the ceremony was about to begin, a sleek black car pulled up to the curb. Eleanor's stomach tightened as a group of sharply dressed individuals stepped out, representatives from the developer. Their presence was an unwelcome reminder of the ongoing battle, and the crowd buzzed with unease as they approached the stage. One of them, A middle-aged man with a practiced smile stepped forward. "Miss Thompson," he said, extending a hand, "we'd like to speak with you privately before the ceremony begins." Eleanor hesitated, then nodded. "Follow me," she said, leading them into the Resource Center building. Inside, the man's smile faded. "We're here to offer a settlement," he said bluntly. "We'll withdraw all legal action if you agree to scale back your plans. Focus on 1 or 2 programs instead of the full scope you've proposed." Eleanor stared at him, her jaw tightening. "You mean abandon the vision this community has fought for? Be reasonable," the man continued. "You're taking a big risk with this project. If it fails, the blame will fall squarely on you. We're giving you an out, take it." Eleanor's response was immediate. "No, this community doesn't need another watered-down solution. We're building something real, and you won't stop us." The man's expression darkened. "You'll regret this," he said, his tone icy. "I've regretted not standing up sooner," Eleanor replied. "That ends today." She walked out, leaving the representatives behind. Eleanor returned to the stage to thunderous applause. As she stepped up to the microphone, she saw the developers' representatives standing in the back, their faces tight with frustration. Ignoring them, she focused on the crowd, the faces of people who had stood by her through every challenge. "Today isn't just about a building," she began. "It's about what this building represents: hope, resilience, and the power of community. For too long, our voices have been ignored, our needs dismissed. But today, we prove that change is possible when we stand together." Her words drew cheers and applause, the energy of the crowd swelling with every sentence. "This resource center belongs to all of us," Eleanor continued. "It's a place where dreams will be nurtured, where barriers will be broken, and where our children will learn that they are capable of achieving anything." As she finished, the crowd erupted into a standing ovation. Jasmine stepped forward, handing Eleanor a ceremonial shovel. Together, they broke the first ground for the project, a symbolic act that sent waves of emotion through the gathering. As the ceremony concluded, a man approached Eleanor. He was older, with a weathered face and kind eyes. "Miss Thompson," he said, extending his hand. "I'm Tom Barker, the judge who reviewed the developer's injunction. I wanted to tell you in person they've withdrawn their case." Eleanor's heart leapt. "Withdrawn? Why?" "Your team's evidence was airtight," Judge Barker said with a smile. "They knew they couldn't win. And frankly, I think they underestimated you." Eleanor thanked him, feeling a mix of relief and triumph. The fight wasn't over. There was still construction to complete, programs to launch, and lives to change. But for the first time, the path ahead felt clear. That evening, as the sun set over the neighborhood, Eleanor returned to the Resource Center site. The groundbreaking ceremony had been a resounding success, and the legal challenges seemed to be behind them. For the first time in months, she allowed herself a moment of quiet reflection. Jasmine joined her, carrying 2 cups of tea. "I thought you could use this," she said, handing one to her mother. Eleanor smiled, taking the cup. "You were right, you know. I couldn't have done this alone." Jasmine shook her head. "You've always been the strongest person I know. But I'm glad you let us help." They sat together in silence, watching as the lights of the city winkled in the distance. The journey had been long and difficult, but Eleanor knew it was worth every moment. The Resource Center's groundbreaking ceremony had been a victory, but the sense of triumph was soon tempered by the immense task ahead. The symbolic first shovel in the ground was just the beginning. There were months of construction, logistical hurdles, and program planning still to come. Eleanor and her team threw themselves into the work, determined to turn their dream into reality. But as the weeks wore on, the community faced a test that none of them had anticipated: a sudden and devastating storm. One evening in late spring, dark clouds rolled over the neighborhood, bringing heavy rain and fierce winds. Eleanor was at home when the first warning came through the radio: severe thunderstorms, potential flooding, and high winds predicted to hit Detroit within the hour. Her thoughts immediately went to the Resource Center. The building was still under construction, its roof incomplete and its walls exposed to the elements. If the storm caused significant damage, it could set the project back by months and jeopardize their already tight budget. She called Marcus, who was on site with a small crew. "We're trying to secure everything we can," he shouted over the sound of hammering and wind. "But it's bad, Eleanor. I don't know if we can hold this together." "I'm on my way," Eleanor said without hesitation, grabbing her raincoat. When Eleanor arrived at the site, the scene was chaotic. Sheets of rain lashed the building, and the wind threatened to tear apart the temporary scaffolding. Marcus, Vernon, and a handful of volunteers worked frantically to cover exposed materials and brace the structure. "You shouldn't be out here," Marcus shouted as Eleanor approached. "Neither should you," she replied, grabbing a tarp and helping to secure it over a pile of lumber. As they worked, more headlights appeared in the distance. Lisa arrived with a group of neighbors, each armed with tools and supplies. Soon, more cars pulled up, residents who had seen the storm warnings and come to help. Together, they formed a human chain, passing sandbags to block rising water and reinforcing the scaffolding with ropes and boards. Despite the driving rain and howling wind, they worked tirelessly, their shared determination lighting the dark night. Just as it seemed they were gaining control of the situation, a deafening crack echoed through the site. A large section of scaffolding collapsed, narrowly missing Marcus and another volunteer. The group froze, their fear palpable. "We need to stop," Lisa said, her voice trembling. "It's too dangerous." Eleanor looked around, her heart pounding. The storm was relentless, and the risks were undeniable. But when she glanced at the faces of the volunteers, she saw something that gave her pause: determination, resilience, and faith. "This isn't just a building," she said, her voice firm despite the chaos around her. "It's a promise to every child who needs a place to learn, to every parent who dreams of a better future. If we stop now, we risk losing more than just time and money. We risk losing hope." Her words galvanized the group. Despite their exhaustion and fear, they pressed on, working together to stabilize the structure and protect what they had built. By dawn, the storm had finally passed, leaving the site battered but intact. Eleanor stood in the mud, her raincoat soaked through, surveying the damage. It wasn't as bad as she had feared. Thanks to the community's efforts, the structure was still standing, and most of the materials had been saved. She turned to the volunteers, her voice hoarse but steady. "What we did tonight, it's what this center is all about. When we come together, there's nothing we can't overcome." The crowd erupted into cheers, their exhaustion giving way to a renewed sense of pride and accomplishment. The storm and the community's response quickly became the talk of the city. Local news outlets covered the story, showcasing footage of neighbors working side by side to save the resource center. The story resonated beyond Detroit, drawing attention from nonprofits, philanthropists, and even a few celebrities who reached out to offer support. Donations poured in, giving the project the financial cushion it desperately needed. With the additional funds, the team was able to accelerate construction, expanding their original vision to include new programs and services. 6 months later, the Resource Center opened its doors to the public. The ribbon-cutting ceremony drew a crowd even larger than the groundbreaking, with residents, city officials, and supporters from across the region in attendance. Eleanor stood at the podium, her heart full as she looked out at the crowd. Jasmine stood near the front, holding the hands of her children, and Eleanor felt a surge of pride and gratitude. "This center is more than just a building," she said, her voice strong and clear. "It's a testament to what we can achieve when we believe in each other and refuse to give up. It's proof that this community is capable of greatness." As the ribbon was cut and the doors opened, the crowd surged forward, exploring classrooms, meeting rooms, and the sanctuary where spiritual gatherings would be held. Eleanor watched as children laughed, parents shared hopeful smiles, and elders reflected on how far they had come. It was a moment she would never forget, the culmination of months of struggle, sacrifice, and faith. That evening, after the celebrations had ended, Eleanor sat alone in the Resource Center's meditation room. The space was simple but beautiful, with soft lighting and walls adorned with art created by local residents. She closed her eyes, letting the silence wash over her. The journey had been long and difficult, but it had also been deeply rewarding. For the first time in years, she felt a profound sense of peace. "This is just the beginning," she whispered, a small smile forming on her lips. The months following the Resource Center's grand opening were transformative for the community. What had begun as a vision in Eleanor's living room had become a vibrant hub of opportunity and support. Classes on financial literacy, career skills, and parenting drew participants of all ages. The sanctuary hosted weekly prayer circles, meditation sessions, and workshops on healing from trauma. Eleanor walked through the halls one morning, marveling at the energy that filled the space. In one room, Vernon led a budgeting workshop, his voice booming as he engaged a group of young adults. In another, Lisa guided a single mother through a job application process, her encouragement soft but steady. "Look at what we've built," Eleanor thought, her heart swelling with pride. The journey had not only transformed the community, but also Eleanor herself. For years, she had carried the weight of feeling responsible for everyone around her, often at the expense of her own well-being. Through this fight, she had learned the importance of leaning on others, of trusting her team and her community. Her relationship with Jasmine had also deepened. They had spent countless hours together, organizing events and brainstorming ideas for the center. One evening, as they cleaned up after a workshop, Jasmine spoke up. "You've always been my hero, Mom," she said, her voice tinged with emotion. "But I didn't realize how much you've sacrificed for us and for everyone else." "I'm glad I finally got to see it up close." Eleanor hugged her daughter tightly, her eyes glistening. "You're part of this, too, Jasmine. I couldn't have done it without you." One of the center's greatest successes was its mentorship program. Marcus, who had grown into a confident leader through the fight for the center, spearheaded an initiative to connect local youth with professionals in tech, education, and entrepreneurship. "People invested in me when I was just starting out," he said during a presentation at a citywide conference. "Now it's my turn to pay it forward." Andrea, the college student who had provided key evidence against the developer, became one of the center's first interns. Her work in community organizing grew into a passion, and she eventually secured a fellowship to study urban development. "I want to make sure every neighborhood has a place like this," she said during her farewell gathering. "It's proof of what's possible when we come together." While the Resource Center thrived, the developer's influence in the area began to wane. Exposed by Eleanor's team and the media, their plans for gentrification fell apart, and they quietly abandoned their remaining projects in the neighborhood. For Eleanor, it was a bittersweet victory. The fight against systemic racism and economic inequality was far from over, but knowing they had protected their community was a step in the right direction. Eleanor's story began to spread beyond Detroit. She was invited to speak at conferences, schools, and churches, sharing her journey and inspiring others to fight for their communities. During one such event, she stood before a packed auditorium, the microphone steady in her hand. "This isn't just my story," she said. "It's the story of countless neighborhoods that have been overlooked, dismissed, and underestimated. But we proved that when we stand together, we can overcome anything." She paused, letting her words sink in. "My challenge to you is this: look around your own community. Find the gaps, the needs, the opportunities for change. And don't wait for someone else to step up. Be the one who does. Because every step forward, no matter how small, brings us closer to the world we all deserve." The audience rose to their feet, applause thundering through the room. Eleanor smiled, knowing the ripple effects of her work would continue to spread. Back at the Resource Center, Eleanor and her team began planning for the next phase of growth. They envisioned expanding their programs, partnering with schools and businesses, and creating a satellite center in another underserved neighborhood. One evening, as they gathered for a strategy session, Marcus raised a toast. "To Eleanor," he said, his voice warm, "for believing in what this community could be and never giving up. To all of us," Eleanor replied, lifting her glass. "This center is just the beginning." That night, Eleanor walked through the Resource Center one last time before heading home. The rooms were quiet now, the lights dimmed, but the spirit of the place was alive and palpable. She paused in the sanctuary, taking a moment to reflect on the journey that had brought her here. The obstacles had been immense, the challenges often overwhelming, but the victories, both big and small, had been worth every sacrifice. Eleanor knelt and whispered a prayer of gratitude, her heart full. When she rose, she felt a profound sense of peace and purpose. The work was far from over, but she was ready for whatever came next. Final message to viewers. Thank you for joining us on this journey of resilience, faith, and community. Eleanor's story reminds us all of the power we have to create change, no matter the odds. If this story inspired you, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more incredible tales of courage and transformation. And remember, change starts with you. Watch our next video to hear how other communities are finding their strength and building their futures.